we have a system where we lock people up at a higher rate per capita than any country in the history of the recorded world. It wasn't always like this in America. Our prison population has gone up 700% in the last 35, 40 years with no benefit to public safety, none. And every aspect of it is cruel. Every aspect of it is unusual, right? And no other country does it this way. And so when you look at inside the numbers, right, we have 4.4% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's prison population. So why is that? Like, are Americans worse than other people? No. Do we have a higher crime rate than other countries? No. Is there any benefit to this policy? No. Does it cost a fortune to keep this thing going? Us taxpayers, everyone's paying for it. You're listening right now, you're paying for it. Everyone pays for this bloated system. I'm not going to call it broken because it works the way it was designed, which is as a lever to control people, mostly poor people, mostly people of color. We lock, and this statistic sounds crazy to me even when I say it, but I know it's true. We lock black people up in America at 6 times the rate of South Africa at the height of apartheid. So we have 33% of the world's female prison population. 33%? What in the world are we doing? And it costs $80 billion is the total incarceration, more or less, budget in this country. $80 billion. It's a huge business. And a lot of it is really a tax on the poor. And it functions as a way to keep poor communities poor and desperate. And that's what it does. By over-criminalizing these people, by not investing in resources that could actually help those communities, but instead cycling them in and out of prison. You know, inside those numbers, Joe, we talked about 700,000 pot arrests every year, mostly, again, people of color, even though they don't use drugs at a higher rate than white people do. In fact, most studies show that they use them at a lower rate. 11 to 12 million people are arrested and jailed, at least for a short period of time in America every year. 11 to 12 million. And those people, forgetting all the other problems with it, in this time of COVID, they go in and out and they bring the disease with them, as do the people who work inside the jails and prisons, right? I mean, the spread in the prisons is well known now. Of course it's spreading. There's nowhere to social distance in a prison cell or in a prison environment. And of course, there's all the workers that go in and out, not just the guards, but the religious people, the social workers, the people who work in all different aspects of the prison, maintenance, whatever. So, I'll stop talking in a second, but the fact is there's a guy who I hope someday will get to be on your show named Alec Karakatsanis, who's the author of a book called Usual Cruelty, which is like my Bible now. And it's Usual Cruelty by Alec, A-L-E-C, Karakatsanis. He's got an organization called Civil Rights Corps, and he's been suing cities and counties all over the country to eliminate cash bail, because cash bail is at the root of a lot of these problems. Bail, historically, was an unsecured bond, right? Which meant that they figured out they wanted to charge people if they didn't show up for trial, right? So, but what that meant is if you were arrested and you were supposed to show up in court, if you didn't show up, they would send you a bill, right? And then in 1899, it changed, and people realized it actually started in San Francisco, strangely enough, which is now actually leading the charge in the other direction. But in 1899, they decided to start charging people up front. So you had to post bail money to be free until your trial. Now, this obviously affected one group of people, poor people, right? Because, we always see the mugshots of celebrities, right, when they're arrested and they're smiling, right? Because their lawyer's waiting outside to take them to a lobster dinner or whatever the hell they're going to go do. And what happened is that soon enough, and Alec taught me a lot of this stuff, soon enough, it became clear that this could be an incredible profit center, right? That charging people for their own freedom, it's a bill you can't afford not to pay. But if you can't afford to pay it, you go to jail. So then emerged this bail bonds industry, right? Which is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. And how that works is if you're poor and you can't afford to post bail for yourself, someone will come along and say, if you give me 10% of the money, non-refundable. Whether you're innocent, guilty, whether your charges are dropped in an hour, it doesn't matter. You give me that money, I keep it, I post the rest, which usually they don't even do. It's just an understanding they have. And you can go home. Now, if you don't do that, think about the consequences, right? So you're picked up for anything. Shoplifting, could be mistaken identity, could be any crime at all, any minor thing. Misdemeanors make up a huge percentage of the jail population. Most commonly, it's just driving on a suspended license. That's the most common cause of arrest, I think, in most places in America, driving on a suspended license. And they're going to put you in a jail cell. They're going to deprive you of contact with your family, of your ability to work, of your ability to take a walk, of your ability to avoid violence that may occur to you when you're in that cell, of all different types. And your very life will be at risk. And so if you don't have the money to avoid that, you're now going to be subjected to being in jail. We have about 450,000 people in jail in America right now as we're sitting here. We don't know if they did anything or not. They haven't been tried. 80% of people in jail have never had a trial yet. And they could sit there for a week, a month, a year, several years awaiting trial. And that's why most of them will plead guilty within about 3.2 days is the average time someone will plead guilty if they're in jail. Whereas if they're out, and think about this too, right? If you're out, you don't plead guilty. You wait and you have your day in court. And it also deprives you of the ability to defend yourself, right? So let's say you're accused of attacking somebody, right? And beating somebody, whatever it might be, right? And you're in jail because you can't post bail. You can't meet with your lawyer. They don't have time to come visit you in jail. You can't get them on the phone readily. You can't take your lawyer to the scene of the crime to show that you couldn't have been there because, or whatever, or the witness couldn't have seen you because the lights or whatever it is. You have no ability to mount an effective defense if you're in jail, which is why 97% of, well, now I'm talking felonies, but 96% of felonies conviction in this country are a result of guilty pleas because people realize they can't fight it and they can't afford to sit in jail because they could lose their job, they could lose their home, they could lose their family if they don't either put up the money, which they don't have, or plead guilty. So this is a problem that is being addressed. Like I said, Alec has been winning lawsuits all over the country because it's a violation of the 6th and the 14th Amendment. You can't call it equal protection if two different people are charged with the exact same thing, but the one with money goes home and the one without money goes to jail.
If you ever really want to see the inequities here and see how the system is so fucked up, go sit. You could do it, obviously not now, but when the world resumes to some sense of normalcy, go to any criminal court and watch the arraignments, all right? And if you watch the arraignments, you will see they parade in all of the arrestees of the last 24 hours, and they read their charges, and they will then set bail. They will make a decision on bail. You'll notice two or three things. One, you'll notice that the vast majority of people in any, certainly in any urban jurisdiction, in any big city, are people of color. And I sat recently watching this happen in Tampa, Florida, because I was working on the James Daly case, and they did arraignments before my hearing. And I sat with a bunch of public defenders, and I listened to them wince every time someone of color, a young person of color, was brought in, driving on a suspended license, possession of marijuana, possession of hydrocodone without a prescription, and they set their bail $1,000, $10,000, $7,000, and they would say, well, that person's going to get out. Or they say, we're going to let you out, but if you don't pay a fine of $1,500 within 60 days, you're back in. Oh, he'll be back in. I'll be representing him again. And you watch, as Jason put it, this churn machine. And you watch how these people of color are treated very differently from white defendants. And you can just assess based on the fact that the judge will say, do you currently have a job? No. Where are you living? Well, I don't know. I'm going to stay on someone's couch. And you start to quickly be able to do the computation in your mind. Where are they coming up with $1,000 or $500? And then they will reoffend, and end up right back where they were. And what will really be striking to you is that I would venture to say in the high 80s in terms of percentage, these people, what they really need is help with an addiction. And if we put a third of the money that we spend incarcerating people, keeping them incarcerated, on drug and alcohol rehabilitation, the incarceration rate would plummet and the recidivism rate, people reoffending would plummet. And not only, we don't have to hypothesize, that's in fact what happens. It happens in countries that, decriminalize drugs, and it happens in countries where there's not such an emphasis on jailing people and there's more of an emphasis on getting them help.
And to answer your question, Joe, I just looked it up because I'm going to quote from the book Usual Cruelty, again by Alec Karakatsanis. Between 80 and 90% of the people charged with crimes are so poor that they cannot afford a lawyer. 25 years into American incarceration boom, black people were incarcerated at a rate 6 times that of South Africa during apartheid. The incarceration rate for black people in the nation's capital where I live is 19 times that of white people. And it still goes on every day. And the net benefit to society, well, there is no net benefit to society. In fact, it's been proven in the University of Pennsylvania, the Quattrone Center did a study that showed that they studied people who were jailed or freed for the exact same crime under the exact same circumstances, right? And this one posted bail and that one couldn't. And they found that the people who went to jail, even if for as little as a few days, were 40% more likely to be arrested for another felony in the ensuing year. So because their lives fall apart while they're in jail, and then, like I said, they lose their job. You can't just not show up for work for a few days and be like, I was in jail, Right. So, and if I could, I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the book, because this really, I think, puts it in stark contrast.
Well, tell people what the book is again.
The book is called Usual Cruelty by Alec Karakatsanis, which is Karakatsanis. It's kind of a tongue twister. And so the book starts off, on January 26, 2014, Charnel Mitchell was sitting on her couch with her 1-year-old daughter on her lap and her 4-year-old son to her side. Armed government agents entered her home, put her in metal restraints, took her from her children, and brought her to the Montgomery City Jail. Jail staff told Charnel that she owed the city money for old traffic tickets. The city had privatized the collection of her debts to a for-profit probation company, which had sought a warrant for her arrest. I happened to be sitting in the courtroom on the morning that Charnel was brought to court, along with dozens of other people who had been jailed because they owed the city money. The judge demanded that Charnel pay or stay in jail. If she could not pay, she would be kept in a cage until she, quote, sat out her debts at $50 per day or $75 per day if she agreed to clean the courthouse bathrooms and the feces, blood, and mucus from the jail walls. An hour later, in a windowless cell, Charnel told me that a jail guard had given her a pencil, and she showed me the crumpled court document on the back of which she had calculated how many more weeks of forced labor separated her from her children. That day, she became my first client as a civil rights lawyer.